Welcome back, everyone. My name is Michael Bradford, and welcome to the Gap Fillers podcast. I would like to, apologize for taking the month off. I've been fairly busy, and I've also been doing some extra stuff. I've been doing some rucking around the county for Missions 22, which is a veterans anti-suicide charity. They help create a community for veterans and to help mitigate veteran suicide. Right now, it's the approximate 22 a day of veterans commit suicide. So, been doing that. A lot has happened in the past month rather. Trump has basically gone off the rails with Epstein. We'll talk about that a little bit. A little bit of Florida news. Florida DOGE plans to audit Orange County. The state is also on pace for, or actually is on record for, is setting a new record for its ninth execution, which is and has been held for about a few decades now. We'll get into that a little bit. And then Alligator Alcatraz is up and running and made its first deportations. So let's get started. So the first thing I want to talk about is definitely the Trump-Epstein thing. There's not a whole lot that hasn't been covered in the news outside of, I can't bring a fresh perspective to most things on that. It's just one of those ironic things that happen with people once they get into power or into office. They end up changing how they view certain policies, and Epstein's one of them. Epstein, it's I don't understand the sudden change up from Trump. Okay, there wasn't a single person who supported him that was like, oh, maybe he is, maybe he isn't, and then all of a sudden he comes out strongly against it. It's like, where'd that come from? There's been there's been pushback a little bit because they were dragging their feet. They had phase one with the binders coming out of the White House, and then all of a sudden it's just non-existent. Who cares? And that's literally what Trump said. You guys keep bringing it up. Well, that was one of those things that people really care about. This kind of shows a disconnect between what Trump values a little bit. Now, I'm not saying that Trump is totally misaligned, but he is focused on other things, primarily tariffs. That's his biggest thing, except for when he wants to, shoot missiles at Iran. Anyways, so that has been, between deportations and tariffs, those are his two biggest policies. So I understand the kind of frustration from him. However, it looks like you're guilty when you come out against something like that. It's like, okay, get the Justice Department or get whoever, the CIA, FBI, to do their thing. Release it all. I mean, obviously not the sex tapes and all that stuff, but if you're gonna say that this is a thing, it wasn't a thing, is a thing, and then he just said today, Clinton's visited the island several times. Okay, so this is something that isn't going away, and he's kind of not letting it go away. So it's just a huge fiasco. I think this is an unforced error by the Trump administration. One of the largest ones of this term for sure. In fact, I can't think of a really big one outside of maybe some foreign policy stuff. It's just if you're innocent, release it. If you're guilty, you're going to hold on to it, and that's what it makes you look like. And now the Dems want to play all high and mighty. Suddenly all they want to do, all they care about is the Epstein files. Okay, well, there wasn't a peep from the Democrats during the Biden administration. It is an absurd political football that no politician really cares about releasing, but they know other people, they know voters care about it. So, or really, it's not that all voters care about it, because you can kind of sway your base. In fact, I was talking to somebody, and then about this, and they're like, who cares about that? I'm like, what are you talking about? Who cares about that? The only reason you're saying who cares about that is because Trump says who cares about that. The same person would talk about the Diddy case. It's like, okay, how come you care about that one, but then all of a sudden Trump tells you not to care about the Epstein files, and you don't care about those? It's kind of absurd. You should. This is, if the government is given authority by the people or by God to deliver justice and to hold evil accountable. That is the most evil thing that you can think. Like, one of the most evil things you can think of is sex prostitution ring and trafficking of possibly children and definitely women. So it's like with Ghislaine Maxwell. She's been, there's been people that have been saying, or rather, Congress has subpoenaed her to talk in front of Congress, but she's in jail for aiding and abetting and running this prostitution ring. But who were her clients? If you're a pretty bad businessman if you don't make a sale, so you're selling to somebody. Who are you selling to? Epstein was worth millions, if not $1 billion. I think he was worth $250 million or something like that. But who is he selling to? That's, and everybody wants to say, oh, that party's involved. That party's involved. Well, you idiots, both of you all are involved, and that's why you don't want to release it. You just want to accuse the other person without ever actually releasing any evidence. The biggest disappointment has definitely been the FBI director, Kash Patel, coming out against it, as well as Dan Bongino. They've practically made their, especially Dan Bongino that's been one of his biggest things in his rise to popularity is the Epstein files. Now suddenly he doesn't care about it. Come on, it's something's fishy in the state of Denmark. That's all I gotta say. All right, so beyond that, release the stupid files and let the cards fall where they may. Let the guilty pay. All right. So moving on to some local news. Orlando, or rather Orange County, has been under audit by the Florida DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency. This is from the Orlando Sentinel. They received a letter. The letter dated July 24th and signed by newly appointed Chief Financial Officer Blaise. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that last name. And two other state officials request data and responses to about 50 items covering procurement, salaries, property management, utilities, diversity, etc. Okay, so they're using this as a way of coming after a lot of these political government-funded political programs, like it says equity and inclusion, and the Green New Deal, as well as transportation grants and homeless services. So this has happened from the dawn of time, ever since there's been bureaucracy. This is, people use this as a corruption, or use a need from a government and try to scrape off the top. Right, so because it's not their money, it's not their problem, and as long as they can market it right, politics is all about marketing. All right, if you can market it right, you can say anything you want. Okay, you can spend anything you want as long as you market it right, and that's basically what has been what happened since the dawn of time. In fact, kings were the just, outright authoritative. Hey, I can do whatever I want. Therefore, because I'm the king, therefore, it's not corruption. But the democracy and republics really kind of make this corruption thing kind of flipped on its head because they have to convince everyone that they're right, which is which is kind of worse. They'll live like kings, spend like kings, and in doing so, try and convince and make everyone say thank you thank you for doing it. So that is basically what happens. So over the this is quote, over the last 5 years, the taxpayers of Orange County have watched as your county government has increased burdens on property owners to the annual tune of $330 million in additional ad valorem tax collections, an increase of 50%, the letter reads. This has been part of the growth in annual total expenditures of over $1.6 billion over the past 5 years, which represents a 57% increase. Now, I'm loath to defend the Orange County government because I think they're basically destroying any kind of rural community in Orange County, in the county. They're looking at getting, Buffalo is barely rural now. Christmas is nuts. And Chiliota, I just passed Chili. I rucked through Chiliota the other day, and let me tell you, there's about 2 or 3 massive developments going up in that area. So that area is going to be built up just like Avalon was. And they've basically maxed out what they can build out on the west part of the county, and they are now tearing down the rest of the east. So they'll go as far as they can until they bump up against the St. John's and the river management areas, and that's probably the state's next step. The state, the WMAs are owned by developers, so we'll as I've stated in previous podcasts. So, what does this mean? Basically, they're going to have to do a financial audit, prove what they kind of go through all the books and basically prove that they're managing these books properly. Now, like I said, back to defending Orange County, and the idea of adding 81,000 residents will increase your base revenue while not as hopefully increasing your revenue or your expenditures, right? So the whole reason that county governments kind of exist is because you can group of people together and will pay taxes and all that fun stuff, and you can basically use the economies of scale to decrease the cost of doing X, right? So as it's also called comparative equity, or no, I forget the business term for it. It's going to come to me in a second. Anyways, so basically what happens is if a police defending your home from a fire, right? You can run all the infrastructure individually, and that will cost you through the ear. Or you can get 1,000 people to pay for a similar form of infrastructure, and because 1,000 people are paying for it, you can introduce efficiencies into the system, right? So the idea is, police, fire, education doesn't have economies of scale because of the way it's the max teacher, right? So if you own a town, if you're in a town of 200, right, you need 1 or 2 cops maybe, or you need some form of law enforcement in the area, if you're in a town, if you're going to enforce local ordinances or anything like that, right? And as you increase, you can get a larger police to resident ratio and still come out more efficient, right? And still have the same amount of defense against injustices. Now, where this really differs is what the culture and what the people in that area hold to value, right? This is what this podcast is really, has been about, is we get the government we deserve, no matter if it's democracy or especially in a republic where we elect our own officials, right? Because if we demand tyranny, we'll get tyranny, and if we act in a way that demands tyranny, we'll get tyranny. Okay, so if people are breaking in and stealing things, you'll get the oversight to stop you from breaking in and stealing things. Okay, you'll get Big Brother, because there's certain things that cops won't do. Right, they won't stop at every single light and make sure that nobody is cutting from in front of you to go straight from the left lane. Right, no cop can. You can't have a cop at every corner, or if you do, you end up with tyranny. Right, so that's why culture is such a demanding factor in governance. Okay, because if you don't have the culture, if you don't have the mindset, the hive mind, so to speak, of this is what we all agree on, don't do it, then there becomes a problem. And especially, I'm going to go down this rabbit hole. This is what has been a problem for the past 100 years, is that we've in an effort to keep people from doing wrong outside of the government in order to do right, like vigilantism, they have overshot the goal. And basically what now has happened is that every good person is afraid to do good, to stop bad, to stop evil. They are, that Penny case that just happened in New York City, where that Marine tried to choke, or tried to subdue a guy that was making trouble on the subway, and they ended up killing that guy by accident. Right, now he got off, but not without spending $1,000 in out the nose for lawyers and destroying his life, pretty much. Because his face was plastered all over TV. So stuff like that, right? Where the government no longer protects good and defeats evil. It protects evil and defeats good. And that will remain a cultural problem until either we demand it change or it gets so bad that it implodes on itself. Kind of, it's, you can almost think of Gotham City. I hate to bring up a fictional place, but like Batman and stuff like that, where everybody's corrupt in the city and the gangs run the city because of that. It's almost like a mixture between L.A., Chicago, and New York. But anyways, I digress because I hate that. I hate doing fictional comparisons, but it's kind of that idea, right? It's why it works so well as a theme, because we can relate to it. Now, people idolize the Joker, and that shows where we are in society. No matter if he was a good villain, as in because he was so evil, he twisted, that it made him a good villain. The idea is that people in our society worship the villain, or worship the hero in the bad hero or something like that, So, anyways, so I digress a little bit from that from the Orange County DOGE a little bit, but basically what has happened is that as we take in more residents into Orange County, you'll get more tax revenue, and in theory, it should be more efficient. Now, that's why we haven't had tax increases like the other counties, especially Seminole. Seminole is looking at increasing their property taxes, as well as 9 other counties around the state. This is, or in the region rather. Now, I think this is a move by Seminole County in order to get ahead of the property tax reform that DeSantis is trying to push. DeSantis is really trying to get rid of property taxes in the state of Florida. The problem, one of the biggest problems is that's one of the biggest revenues for any municipality is property tax. They'll take a little slice of what you own, and you'll end up paying for the rest of your life, and so you never actually own the property. Now the problem is that in Florida we have so many people who don't live in Florida, or and they'll but they still own resident or own units in Florida, basically depriving the state of revenue if we get rid of property taxes. So what I would suggest, again, like I think I've stated this before, is an out-of-state property tax. So, and then I'll defer from talking about the residency quotas and all that for right now. But basically, if you live out of state, you should pay a property tax because you're not inputting into the fire, the police the basic services that the county provides. So if we're all going to get taxed, if we're living here, you should be taxed because you're taking up a unit and you're not paying in through another form of government revenue. So there's that. So basically what that was basically Samrad's point of view. Commissioner Samrad's Samrad, these names are that's her one of her also point of views is the state demands that the city spend or the county spend 30% of the tourist tax money on Visit Orlando, which is basically a tourism advertising site. It's a way of getting perpetuating the tourism industry in Orlando, which I don't think is a good idea. Or people will come to Disney and people will come to Universal, whether there is an advertising agency or not for that. Why make it 30%? Why not 10? You can drastically lower that while also bringing in extra revenue for around the county. Other than that, so lastly, I want to talk about is I want to talk about this concept. Okay, so since Trump has come into office, you can really see this shift in the political landscape. I saw this Jubilee does this thing. Now Jubilee is definitely liberal. They'll set up conservatives to kind of look bad. That's kind of what they do. They're not full on liberal, but they say they attempt to be neutral, but they end up setting they want to churn the waters, as so to speak. And so I saw this one guy, and in fact he got fired because of this kind of thing where they set up 20 people that claim to be one thing to argue with one guy who's an so to speak expert, and one of these 20 ended up saying he was a fascist. Right now, this isn't. I view fascists just like communists. They are equal in my book. They end up being just as authoritative and wrong because they ended up in genocide and murder and basically having to inflict through sheer will uniformity in their society, right? Either communism, it's class; fascism, it's usually some sort of race or nationality or something like that, right? So one thing I want to warn you all about is something called the Overton Window. Okay. So think of the Overton Window is basically the group of ideas that are deemed acceptable, whether you like them or not. They're deemed acceptable by society. Okay, so oftentimes this is used in politics, right? But you can also have it in culture. You can have it in really small groups. You can have it in churches. You can have it in families, where like very, very minute things are viewed as basically values or a form of this is what you do, period. And so this is, in fact, that's what happens when kids go to school and hang around friends with opposite views. Their Overton window shifts, or their view shifts outside of the Overton window of the family, and that's when you have major conflict. So what has happened in society since Trump has come in is, now I'm not calling Trump a fascist. I have to pre-text, this. Trump is not a fascist. Okay, he is a populist, and he'll kind of lean towards what he believes other people want in a lot of ways. That's why he suddenly backed off of the orange growers, or not the orange growers, but the illegal immigrants, working on farms. He, for the past 12 years, that's all we heard about is illegal immigrants. Well, where do you think the illegal immigrants work? Construction sites and farms. And maybe in like the hospitality industry, like cleaning and stuff like that. Those are like the three quintessential generic jobs that people think of illegal immigrants doing. Okay, so one of those three, Trump said we're going to back off on. Okay, well, basically he sensed a shift in the Overton window, and that's what a lot of politicians do, especially when they try to be moderate. Right? They try to say nothing, do nothing, fly under the radar, and kind of be popular enough to stay in office, but not do enough to become unpopular. And in fact, Trump has done the opposite. Because he's a populist. He'll say whatever he needs to say, but on a large, grandiose scale. In order to you need to churn up and make people angry a little bit. Whether for the right or wrong reasons. That's basically what he's done. All right, so the Overton window. Think of all acceptable ideas on a line, right? So the easiest would be they're generally viewed as opposites, but I group them together as communist and fascist, right? But for ease of understanding's sake, right? So you got communist on one side, on the left, and you got fascism on the right. Okay, both end up in authoritarian views, and both are, or at least should be, viewed as abhorrent and unacceptable forms of government, right? So you have that. You have two forms of government on each side, okay? And then so both are viewed as unacceptable. On the edges, you have, and then think of working in towards the middle, okay? Think of, like socialists, or, people who are, they're generically okay with everything, but they kind of want healthcare or something like, or they want, on the other side, they want, I don't know, closer to fascism, but not, on the right. Okay. And then think of, what you have in Congress, or think of what you would want, whether you're on the left or on the right. Okay. Most people fall into that bell curve, that creates a window, excuse me, of acceptable ideas. Okay. So if you're within that window, if you're on the edge, it's viewed as an unpopular but okay view of the world. Okay. So that then you work in, and you have, you get more and more moderate. Okay. Most politicians try to be in the exact middle, or just to the right, or just to the left of that line of the middle of the Overton window. Because that's usually where the biggest population of voters will be, right? Their bases will be outside, or more towards the edge. Their base will. These are the people who get cited, who do more political stuff, are politically active. They have an issue or two, or but most people kind of are passive about politics, and that's one of the reasons why one of the weaknesses of a democratic form of government is because most people are passive about that. As long as the rules stay the same, they don't care until somebody brings it to their attention. And that's what's happened a lot in the past 20 years, so to speak. And even for the past 80 years, right? Ever since the fall of Nazism during World War II, the world has shifted to where the left is much more acceptable from the right. So think of the Overton window shrinking, but instead of shrinking from the right, or from both ends, think of it shrinking all the way to the way far away from that fascist line, and that where the Nazis were. Okay, now over the 20th century, communism, especially in the earliest or mid 20th century, the communism line was pretty shrunken too, right? In the 20s, and you had the Red Scare, you had the people, what was his name? There was a senator that was basically all about the red. He basically accused people in the government of being infiltrated by the communist state in the Soviet Union. What was his name? McCarthy. Yeah, it was the McCarthy hearings. That's what it was. Yeah. So you had people, the shrinking of the Overton window. Now, when the Overton window is really close together, that usually means a really steep bell curve, right? So most of the population is united, and that actually creates a more united form of government, or especially within, or united society rather, because there's things that people disagree on, but they generally move between within this window of acceptable ideas, and they very rarely cross. Now, it's not a very creative society usually, and it's usually and it doesn't help advancement because people are all agreeing, and when people all agree, people don't really come up with fresh ideas, right? It results in a stagnant society usually. Now, what also happens when the Overton window gets too large, the same exact thing happens, because so many people are that bell curve is so flat that it's hard for anybody to unite on anything. And that's what's happened over the last 12 years with Trump. It started with Obama. You can actually think of, all right, let's actually go back to Bush, right? Bush, when 9/11 happened in 2001, Bush widened the Overton window to the right, with the Patriot Act and the wars in the Middle East. He expanded it to the right. Now, by the midterms in 2004, the Democrats were slowly reaching a point of, instead of widening the window, they kind of shifted the window back towards the center. Now, because of war fatigue and stuff, and the WMDs and all that stuff. So basically, there was a lot of economic stagnation. Stock market barely moved. Was very fairly stable, not moving much. Not much of economic prowess, and then so it shifted back towards the middle. Instead of it widened, but it kind of, instead of shifting to the left, it kind of basically shrank from the right and became more into the middle. It did shift, widen a little bit to the left. There was quite a bit of backlash, but overall, it kind of shifted back to the middle. Okay. And then 2007, 2008 happened, and the financial crashes, the recession, recession happened, and that basically pulled the country towards the left, right? Because the banking, the institutions, Obama, he was able to rally the Democrats for Obamacare, things like that, right? So he was able to pull he didn't pull the right to him, so it widened to the left. Okay. Now, as Obama's terms went along, especially during the second one, and both of Obama's opponents were very, very, very moderate, if not leftist Republicans. With John McCain. John McCain was a neocon, so he was, if you think about it on that scale, he was actually probably far right. And then same with Mitt Romney. They didn't have any radical ideas, right? So they weren't really widening to the right. Even with the Tea Party movement by the end of Obama's second term, but you also had the Occupy Wall Street people on the those are widening towards the communist area on the left. Okay, now Trump comes in and basically blows up the window. It shoots to the right with build the wall, China, nationalism a little bit. And then you have people just on the left, blue-haired liberals, going at whatever. They basically shoot for universal healthcare. Bernie Sanders was in 2016, even before Trump came to office. But overall, they went with the standard Democrat in Hillary Clinton. Because she would have appealed more to the center, so to speak. That's what they thought. In doing so, they demotivated their base that's closer to the edge of the Overton window, and ended up having a lot of problems on that, while completely isolating, almost like pulling to the right, the Overton window, where Trump gets more and more acceptable views. Okay, so in 2016, it was the Democrats widening through mistakes, and Trump, being the populist that he is, being able to take advantage of it. Now, Trump wasn't the most popular, but he was able to get enough to win election, and that's why the Overton window. In the regional Overton window matters, because Republicans in New York and California are not Republicans in North Carolina or Texas. Now, there's a lot of those people because, again, politicians try to do as little as possible, just enough to remain popular without doing enough to basically they want popularity. They don't want the attention, so to speak, right? They don't want to be the guy. They don't want to be the leader, even though that's what people are really elected to Congress for, is to lead for your values. The problem is that they just want to stay in office, so they'll have their one or two things that say, yeah, I did that, but they won't be able to have, enough of the the will and the honor and the courage to stand out from the crowd and push for your items, even if they have to concede a little bit on one, concede a little bit on another. They don't do that at all. They basically concede their entire bill of goods to the leadership of the parties, whether it's Johnson or I honestly think that Johnson is just a puppet for somebody else. Just like but I think Pelosi demands more of the leadership role on the Democrat side, and basically she basically kind of sets the policy, and man, she can basically whip those the Democrats into shape. So, but the Republicans are, because they're a coalition party as opposed to the Democrats. are much more divided because of that. So basically, but in 2020, it kind of blew up, kind of tightened real hard with the pandemic. People got scared. People shifted drastically. Populations, people moved really, drastically. A lot of things happened. Biden got elected, and the party started to shift right, or the country started to shift right, and in doing so, they allowed it more open for Trump's ideology. Now, it didn't shift right. It expanded right. So more of the authoritarian nationalist ideas were able to creep in a little bit more. And in doing so, people felt more comfortable coming out, saying, whatever, more nationalist ideas, deport them, deporting and tariffs, all of that is a more nationalist mindset of government. It's usually more unifying because of that, but in a coalition, it's not, right? Again, communism is based on class, and the nationalism is based on less flexible. You can't change the things that are valuable to a more nationalist view. You can change a lot of things that you don't have to work hard to be in a class that appeals to the communists, right? You can just say you cannot think and be in a communist. But you can also not think and be a nationalist too. Anyways, so because they appeal to class is what I'm trying to say, right? You don't have to be successful. Or if you are successful, you're more likely to not be a communist, so to speak. Anyways, but basically what has happened since Trump's election is that people have felt more okay to say that they're fascist, even straight fascist. And so that indicates almost an expansion of the Overton window, or a widening of the Overton window to such a place where it is flatlined the culture. And, you can see this in Congress with barely anything being able to be done for good or for ill. They'll pass to, spend more money, but the Democrats won't. So, you got this widening, so wide of Overton window where people almost feel comfortable talking about any, or not talking about, but claiming any point of ideology around that. Now, that doesn't mean that the Overton window is fixed there. It can shift very quickly depending on how stuff goes. I didn't even get to the alligator Alcatraz today, but this is kind of a long podcast because of I'm missing the whole month pretty much. But anyways, so what is the point of me bringing up the Overton window? It is a warning. It is a caution to realize how people hold ideas, right? If more people are comfortable saying it, you're more likely to be willing to accept it. It's just the way a lot of culture works, right? People can shift ideas on Epstein. They can shift ideas on any given number of things if they feel like if they feel comfortable with being within that Overton window. And Overton window is not the same for everyone, really. But overall, you kind of have to average out everybody's window, so to speak. And as a culture, it's kind of what the idea is. Now, just because the guy claimed to be a fascist doesn't mean that fascism is acceptable. In fact, because he got fired, it's probably still meaning that it's outside the bounds. But it's probably that means it's probably closer to that. Now, I am much more prone to be on the right. In fact, I would be classified as far right. Let's just be honest. In today's society, or in Biden's world, I'd be classified as far right. even though I have a few libertarian ideals, especially in economics. But overall, I'd be on the far right, and I view the or I'd be classified that by the Democrats rather. But that's because they're so far in communist land that they don't that they think that they're more moderate when they're not, because the Overton window has stretched so far. They think that because they see a lot of people kind of agreeing with them that the other side must be so far right. Now that doesn't necessarily mean it's true, because everyone else is so spread out on political views that it's basically making it untenable to function as a government. And it'll be very interesting to see what happens in the next few years. So, anyways, thank you for joining me for this week's podcast. If you want to support the podcast or program, whatever you want to call it, follow me on X at Gapfiller1776. Follow me or subscribe on YouTube. Follow the Facebook page. I'll post the link for the DOGE up there after this. And thank you, and have a good week.